to the brand new podcast, Mind Shift. I'm Sam Pauly, and over the course of this 6-part series, we'll be uncovering the critical role that metals and minerals play in the things we use every day, from smartphones and cars to power cables and domestic appliances, and why these materials are also central to the global transition to renewable energy. We'll be looking at how we can source these vital resources more sustainably and the collective effort needed to do just that. In this episode, we're focusing on copper. It's in your laptop, your fridge, your home wiring, and it's also at the heart of clean energy technologies like solar panels, wind turbines, and electric vehicles. Today, we'll explore where copper shows up in daily life, why it's so essential to the energy transition, and what it's really going to take to meet growing global demand in a more sustainable way. Joining me to share their insights, I'm delighted to welcome from multinational engineering company Weir, CEO Jon Stanton, and Menno Sanderse, CFO for Copper at Rio Tinto, the world's second largest metals and mining corporation. So, are you ready to walk down Electric Avenue with us and have your mind shifted? Jon and Menno, thank you so much for being with us. It's great to have you with us.
Great to be here, Sam. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam.
So, Jon, let me start by you. Let's go straight into it. In the introduction, I mentioned a few everyday examples where we find copper, but that's really just the tip of the iceberg. We're also seeing this much bigger shift towards electrification. Can you explain what that actually means and why that's happening?
Yeah, so look, there is going to be an energy transition over the next few decades, and that's partly going to be driven by what's happening with climate. And we can see that every day in the newspapers in terms of the events around the world, be they hurricanes, wildfires. The climate is clearly getting more extreme, and we need to do something about it. But also, we rely today entirely almost on fossil fuels, and they're going to run out. So, wherever you are on the drivers, the energy transition is going to happen over the next few decades. And that is going to require the shift from fossil fuels to renewables energy and a metals-driven complex that will ultimately support that situation. And copper is absolutely fundamental to that. It's ubiquitous. It's in everything. It's the best conductor of electricity that we have. I'll correct that slightly. Silver is a better conductor, but it's much more expensive. So copper is a good conductor and efficient. There are alternatives in terms of things like aluminium, but that's a much worse conductor than copper. So copper is needed in huge quantities to enable the energy transition in electric motors, electric vehicles, other forms of transportation, in the whole build out of renewables energy, the grid, battery storage. It's going to be absolutely critical.
But it's also twofold, really, isn't it? Because it's around us in everything that we do in our daily lives. We perhaps don't even think about so much.
Absolutely. It's in the wiring in our homes, in the copper pipes in our homes, in every device, every piece of electronics, every piece of consumer goods that we have, anything that's driven by an electric motor, the drones, they all need copper to operate. So it is, as I say, it is ubiquitous. It's everywhere, and we're going to need a lot more of it if we are going to shift to a kind of economy and an environment where those devices and renewable energy is increasingly critical.
Menno, let me bring you in here. What trends are you seeing in the demand for copper and in which sectors, and how are you modelling that demand over the next decade, for instance?
Yes, and let me pick up on a few things that Jon said. Copper is everywhere. It has very broad applications, but obviously it's most well known for its role in generating, transmitting, and storing electricity. If we look at the market overall, we see two buckets of demand really. One is called what you call the traditional sources of demand, and one is the new. In traditional, think about construction, think about consumer electronics, think about manufacturing equipment. That is about 70% of demand today. The new sources, mainly to do with renewable energy and electrification, including support for artificial intelligence and the power that consumes, it's about 30% of demand today. That new demand, we see that growing, or we see that account for about 50% of all the growth in the next 25 years. Today, there is about 32 million tons of copper in demand, and we see that growing, or consensus see that growing, to about 60 million tons, just below that, by 2050. Now, there are two ways to basically fulfill that demand. First, we can have more recycling, and secondly, new mines. Um, After we do our numbers and we look at the benefit of recycling, because we think recycling will contribute more to supply in the future than does today, we think you need about 10 million tons of new mine supply by 2035, or about 25 million tons by 2050. And if you summarize that, basically, if you look at those numbers over 25 years, we are going to have to mine more copper in the next 25 years than we have in the whole of human history.
So that's a growth that we've never seen the likes of before, as you say. Are we moving quickly enough to meet it?
In my opinion, there's a better understanding across governments and regulators about the volume of material that is needed to support the energy transition, but also to support continued industrialization of about 3 billion people that live in abject poverty today. But there is not enough understanding, in my view, of the effort that is needed to deliver this. Think about the financial capital required. Think about the human capital capital required. Think about the technology and innovation that is needed to find better ways to extract this material, and the time and effort. Governments are getting a better understanding and are actually labeling copper in some cases a critical mineral, which they never did before, which shows you how important they think it is. And in some cases, they're investing directly in copper resources and in partnerships with companies like ourselves to extract it.
Yeah, and it's just a couple of things to build on that. I think it's not just new mines. I think you said it. We need everything to work. We're going to need more new mines in the future. We're going to need to get more production from existing mines to sort of improve yield and productivity from those mines. We're going to need more recycling. We're going to need potentially alternative technologies. So if we are to achieve the energy transition and get anywhere close to net zero by 2050, I think we need all of the above to happen. And the other thing I'd add is that, it's not just the mines. You have to think about the whole metallurgical industrial complex, because you can dig the stuff out of the ground, but then where are you going to smelt it, refine it, all of those downstream processes, that needs to be thought through as well. So there are some really encouraging signs from governments at the moment about, we understand we will need to build more mines and develop them more quickly, but there's all of the other things that then need to happen as well to enable that to actually happen.
I mean, there's clearly a balance here, isn't there, to strike between achieving these demands and the increase in them. Given that we're increasing the demand, but we've got to. What do you say on the balance, really, that we've got to strike, Jon?
Yeah, I think it is going to be a balance, and it's all about supply and demand, and making sure that as the demand grows, for the reasons Menno talked about, that the supply grows in sync. Because I think what none of us who sort of participate in the industry want is really a sort of boom and bust scenarios where supply can't keep up with demand, or vice versa. That's in nobody's real interest. So I think what we're all looking for who participate in the industry is a really kind of thoughtful progression of the development of supply, which kind of is in line with where demand is going. But then, given the time horizons that we're talking about, that does get quite difficult in terms of providing the finance, making sure that the miners get the returns they need to be able to keep investing. It's a really, really difficult balancing act, and I think it is going to need a system-wide approach whereby the miners, the other participants in the industry, governments, the NGOs who represent communities and the environment that we need to work with, everybody needs to come together to enable this in a thoughtful way.
Do you think, we've spoken a little bit about the recognition of policymakers and things, but the end user, and consumers, are they recognising this challenge that we all face? Or do you think we just sort of expect to have, all the technology we want with no compromises, Jon?
Well, I think part of the reason for doing this podcast is to sort of help raise awareness, because I'm not sure that everybody realises where stuff comes from. And if you think the way the world is developing, the consumer society that we have today, the things that we take for granted in terms of what we can now do with our mobile phones and other devices, it's all built essentially on the metals industry. One of my favorite quotes is that literally everything that's, you see in a room around you anywhere in the world is either grown or dug out of the ground. I mean, that is literally where everything comes from. And I think, it's really important that the consumers understand that and the criticality of the supply chain to enable the things that they want to have. Because I think, notwithstanding, there's some politicization around net zero, right? But we need to do the right thing for the planet, and we need to strive to enable this energy transition. And part of that is education, so that the consumer is making informed choices about where to go with their personal devices and so on.
Menno, I can see you nodding along. Do you want to add anything to that on the sort of consumer understanding of?
It's in our day-to-day lives. It's logical that we don't really think about where these things come from, and it's different than with oil and gas. Clearly, we've all gone on a holiday trip and gone to a motor service to get some petrol and a refreshment. Yeah, that's not the case for copper. And obviously, copper mining takes place in quite remote locations, so there's not an immediate affinity with it, and that's something that we need to change. And we are trying to do our best, obviously, to increase awareness of the need for it and how big an enterprise this is. So I'm glad to be here today to talk about that.
Jon, we've pick up on a couple of the things that you've already mentioned in a little bit more detail. We've talked about recycling. What ways can copper be sourced, and can we be looking more to recycling?
Yeah, no, I definitely think recycling has a part to play. It's difficult to believe that we're just going to build a lot of new mines and that's going to satisfy all the demand that's coming. I just don't think that is going to be possible in the sort of timeframes that we're talking about for many, many reasons. So I think recycling is going to be very important, and I think the thing that underpins almost all of this is how we use technologies to do things better. So, and recycling is a great example of that, because it's quite difficult to do. It's quite difficult to knock a building down and pull all the copper cabling out of the plastic kind of insulating material that it's in. There's some quite challenging process around that. So I think how do we drive better recycling technologies that will enable more supply to come from that source. In terms of the new mines that need to be built, this is something that Weir is very interested in from a technology point of view. Is how can we do things in a better way? How can we make new mines that are more efficient, require less energy and less water to process minerals, and adopt sort of an endowment approach with community and the environment that they operate in, so that it's seen as a force for good. And I think we've all got work to do sort of to boost the reputation of the industry in that regard. Because, as I said, we need recycling, we need new mines, we'll need existing mines to produce more, and there may well be other sort of technologies emerge as well. So I think we need to do all of the above, and we need to make sure that there's broad recognition of the benefit of doing that, and to be really authentic about that, and make sure that we don't just make promises but we deliver on them.
It's a very broad topic, maybe to pick up on a few things, because this really goes to the heart of it. Just to throw some numbers out first on recycling. Recycling accounts for about 9 million tons of supply in that 32 million ton market today. But 5 million tons, roughly 5 million tons, is available but doesn't get recycled. That comes back to Jon's point that it's very difficult sometimes to separate it. So that 5 million tons either ends up in a landfill. That's bad, clearly. We need to change that. Or it ends up in a steel furnace because it's attached to a piece of steel that gets recycled. So there's an opportunity there. Despite that, clearly, to Jon's point, recycling alone is not going to be enough. So we need new mines. We need a significant number of new mines. And there, to deliver that, to deliver those mines, we will need a better approach to mining than we've seen in some periods in the past. No? We have a reduction of footprint and leaving a better legacy, as Jon talked about.
So tell me a little bit more about that, Menno, then. What does sustainable copper production mean in practical terms then for Rio Tinto, and maybe some of the challenges that you face in addressing that?
Yeah, it comes down to the two things I've said, footprint and legacy. And with footprint, I mean it in the broadest sense. It is the use of water, the consumption of power, it is the land we disturb, and on legacy, it is really around two things. We build a lot of infrastructure when we build mines. That infrastructure can be used for other purposes. Think about railways, ports, roads. We also build a lot of civil infrastructure, or we support the construction of a lot of civil infrastructure. Leisure centers, hospitals, schools, especially in less developed countries where some of our mines are. And clearly they can be used for multi-purpose. And on the other side, clearly, the traditional economic legacy we need to leave. For that, we need to, I think, cooperate better with local communities and traditional owners, as we are doing at the moment. And all these things together need to fall in place to set up a mining model that is better than it has been.
And has there been a shift in the way that Rio Tinto is approaching these challenges? And have you got any examples?
Absolutely. In the past, we were maybe, as a mining industry and as Rio Tinto, a little bit too insular about the way we went about things. Very maybe tunnel visioned as an engineer to make the best mine. I think what's changed is that it is clear that you cannot do these things in isolation. Partnerships are critical because we don't have all the answers. So we need to learn from others, and we need to learn from others early so we can incorporate this in our design and the way we operate a mine over its lifetime. And if I think about examples, for instance, our partnerships with government in Mongolia, the government is planning to plant 1 billion trees by 2030 because desertification is a big issue in Mongolia and the Gobi Desert. We are an active contributor to that program, and we're now about 20% into that target. In other places, in terms of reducing our footprint, two very good examples actually. Again, Mongolia, Oyu Tolgoi is the mine, the South Gobi Desert, so water is scarce. We are using 0.4 cubic meters of water per ton of rock that we process, but which is 65% less than the average globally for mines of that nature. They're called open pit mines. Another example is in Chile, very high up in the Atacama Desert. There's a mine called Escondida. It's operated by BHP. We own 30% of it as Rio Tinto. It operates 100% on desalinated water and 100% on renewable energy.
So can mining ever be truly sustainable?
Mining, like any human activity, has an impact on the environment. So it is very difficult to argue that it's truly net zero. But what companies like ourselves need to do, with the help of for instance, Jon's company, is to minimize our footprint, as I said, and to leave that legacy. Or if we cannot minimize it, to offset the impact we have.
Well, let me bring you back in, Jon. I wanted to ask you to maybe how we can address some of these challenges that Menno mentioned, but also, are you seeing your customers increasingly asking for support or solutions to align with their own sustainability goals?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's been a big shift in the industry over the last few years, and as a supplier to many of the large miners around the world, we've been on the receiving end of some of that tunnel vision historically. But I think there's a broad realization now among industry participants that we need to work together. We need to work in partnership. None of us have all of the answers. We need to collaborate to create the right solutions. So I see a big shift over the last couple of years in the way that that's operating, and that is very common around the world, I would say, with our large customers. So I'm very, very encouraged by that. I think we're working towards a common goal now. But it's not just sustainability, Sam. I think that there's a real win-win to be had here because you can, in our view, have better commercial business outcomes alongside better sustainability outcomes. And frankly, if you're not getting both, then you've got a problem because we all have our financial targets to meet. We all have to deliver the returns to providers of capital. You can't, it's a competitive world. You can't compromise on that. But if you can do that by delivering through, better sustainability outcomes as well, then that's great. And water is a wonderful example of that. Water and energy. Water's, if you look at the mining complex around the world, half of the mines around the world have got too little water, and the other half have got too much. So both of those sets have a problem to solve. And in arid areas, water is very, very expensive. So you can reduce your water consumption, which is obviously better for the environment if you're not drawing out of boreholes or rivers. but also it's costing you less. So what we're trying to achieve for our customers and working in partnership with is those real win-wins where we can have better commercial outcomes and better deliver on our sustainability goals as well.
Just to pick up on that, Sam, I think it's a very good point. Uh, and as John said, we're not just doing this because this is the right thing to do. As John said, we're doing this because this makes business sense. If we don't adjust the way we work and reduce our footprint, how can we expect communities to accept our presence for 40, 50, sometimes 100 years? If we don't improve the way we operate and reduce our footprint, how can we expect to attract the talent of today? No, they have so many other opportunities at a time when we need that talent. We need that talent to innovate and to come up with these new ways of and better ways of mining.
Well, let me ask a bit more about innovation and technology. How you've mentioned it, both of you, a little bit, but how crucial is it, and how much are we seeing already and what's in the pipeline, John?
Well, I think we've tried to sort of boil down the industry issues into a few sort of key phrases. As the industry delivers on more metals and minerals, we collectively need to enable the use of less energy, use water very wisely, and create less waste. So, some of the historic challenges with tailing dams, for example, need to be addressed. So all of those things can only be solved through technology and innovation, to my mind. And, Menno would probably agree with this. Historically, the industry has been quite conservative to adopt new technologies. And mining is difficult. So people in the industry, mining engineers, do like to have what they know works, as they have through their careers. So we're sort of trying to innovate and bring in new technologies, but we have to really collectively work together to make that happen. And as an industry, be bold and brave in some of the choices that we're making to do that. And maybe it does involve taking a little bit more risk as well. But the thing that I like about this question is that this is not something that's the future mine that is in the distance, and how do we get there? A lot of the technology is available today that can significantly reduce energy and water consumption, can do tailings and waste in a different way. And it's about how we make that work economically to deliver the business and the sustainability outcomes at the same time.
And are there any examples of promising technologies that we can be using, opportunities to unlock efficiencies that you can cite?
Yeah, there are many. I mean, not to get into sort of necessarily some of the specifics, but if you think about tailings, the traditional way of doing tailings, which is the waste stream that comes out of the back end of a mine, everything is ground to a very, very fine powder, and it has to be dewatered over many, many years in tailings ponds, which have dams and can be dangerous, as we've seen tragically where there have been failures. So how do you not do that? Well, you've got to come up with different ways of processing whereby you can liberate the waste material when it's a much larger particle, for example. So it doesn't need to go into a tailing pond. You can create a byproduct that you can actually stack very, very safely. But then how do you do that economically as well? So that again, it always all comes back to that win-win of how can we not do that, but do it in a cost-effective way that makes sense for customers. So we have a big pipeline of things that are really focused on trying to do that.
Menno, what technologies are you particularly excited about?
Yeah, and just coming back before I answer that question, Sam, just coming back on John's point, he's absolutely right. Mining has been a very traditional industry, not just because engineers are comfortable with the things that they're comfortable with and want to do the right thing, also because it's quite a dangerous industry. And because it's a dangerous industry, you tend to stick to what you know is the safest way of doing it. But times change and also conditions change, and mining is getting harder. There are more demands, rightfully, on it, and therefore now is the time to adopt those changes and those innovations. And the one that there is many innovations that we are. There are many innovations that we are including in our flow sheets, in our existing flow sheets, including not grinding as fine and still extracting the copper from the rock to make sure we use less energy and to make tailings dams safer. But the main thing we are focused on at the moment is the leaching that John talked about. How can we extract copper from larger rocks that you don't have to grind very fine, and maybe even go back into old waste dumps, waste rock from 50, 60 years ago, which have a lot of copper in them compared to the current rock, and reprocess those with that leaching technology, where you don't need a very large mill to grind things very fine.
How long is it going to be, do we think, before we start seeing the beneficial impact of these sorts of technologies, and how do we make that relevant to everybody today?
No, I mean, I think it's already happening, and we see some of the newer greenfields, large expansion projects coming through that have different flow sheets than the mines of the past would have had, which is dry grinding processes, different tailings processes I've talked about. So that's really encouraging, and I think that that's starting to happen as people think about new mines, because one of the things that's delayed the development of greenfield projects is actually getting the licenses and permits, and that's just got harder and harder. And frankly, if you're using old technology which doesn't give any improvement, then you're not going to get those licenses. It's going to be much harder. So I think it's a critical enabler to development. But going back to what I said earlier, I think there's also a huge opportunity, Menno alluded to it, on existing mines, to retrofit in a modular way some of the new technologies that make those existing mines more productive, get better yield, more efficient, reduce water consumption. I think there's lots of opportunity across all of the mines that already exist around the world to apply that technology.
Just to build on John's point, innovation is already having a very, very large impact. The reason why you don't see it is related to one of the points that John mentioned earlier. Mines are depleting animals. No? They go down in terms of the content of the mineral or metal that is there. So you have to work harder every year to extract the same volume of metal. And in some mines, you actually don't see them depleting because we are applying those innovations. The question now is, can we crack these really, really big new technologies and apply them at scale? And then it comes back to, it takes time to get comfortable that you can deploy a large amount of capital to do that, and that it's safe to do. And those two things have to go hand in hand.
Menno, you talked a bit earlier about attracting the right talent into the industry. It seems like it's clearly a very exciting and innovative industry to be working in. I'll come to both of you on that.
I think it is. But look at me, I'm I'm not straight out of university, unfortunately. I wish I was. So there is an enormous opportunity to be involved in really exciting projects, applying new technologies, making a difference, reducing impacts. But people have choices, and therefore it's up to us to demonstrate that the way we operate is different than we have done it in the past. And it's up to us to, I think, increase the awareness of this industry, clearly, especially in the Western world. In China, there are tens of thousands of engineers that leave university every day. So there are plenty of them that are interested in mining and processing. Less so in the UK or the US or Europe.
Yeah. No, I think it's a really, really important point, and I think the industry has the opportunity, and I think it's really starting to do it, to be really quite purposeful, and set out the real mission that we collectively have here, to deliver on the metals and other critical minerals that are going to enable the energy transition. Because people want to come work for companies that are doing something meaningful, and if we get this right, we are going to enable the energy transition. We are going to start to make some headway against climate change and so on. And that, is very, very attractive to people coming into the industry, to my mind. So we've had quite a lot of success, and I know our customers have, in terms of attracting in new talents and capabilities, people from different disciplines. For example, we all need more software engineers and data scientists and people who are much more familiar with AI than the older people in the industry like Menno and I, to come in and help us adopt those new technologies. But they're only going to come to our industry rather than tech or something else if we can really set out that purpose that means something to them, and they feel they can come to work and make a difference for the planet. And it's no less than that.
You said you've had quite a lot of success doing that, John. How has Weir gone about that?
I think it's been about being very clear about what we are trying to do, setting out a very, very clear purpose and mission and the values about how we're going to do that, so that people feel they can come and work for a company like Weir and do meaningful work and make a difference. And then making sure that our people around the world who work with our customers and in the mining towns around the world and interact with academic institutions and are ambassadors for the industry and the companies in the industry and what they're doing. I mean, they're our best salespeople, our employees, and you know. People who are on the inside of the industry and work in it, I mean, they love it. It's such an exciting place to be. Because of everything that we're trying to do and the dynamic nature of mining and processing. It's one of the most challenging things industries that you can operate in my mind. So and it just comes back to that win-win. We can have great outcomes commercially, but if people feel they're delivering on sustainability goals as well, then it's just a win-win.
Menno, to finish, what
Hmm.
do you think is going to be key to success in our approach, and particularly around sourcing copper and meeting that growing demand? Who do you want to see stepping up, and what's the prize if we get this right? What kind of future could we create together?
Yes. I think there are three things that I think we need. We need support, technology and innovation, and partnerships, in particular in copper mining, because copper mining is complicated. Support from governments and regulators, not blanket approvals, but streamlined and efficient permitting processes. We need technology and innovation because it's getting harder and harder to extract copper from rock. So we need an innovation to limit our footprint and bring costs down. And we need partnerships with local communities, traditional owners, NGOs, to ensure that we consider all their thoughts and concerns in the design of the mine and the processing facilities, as well as how we operate the mine over 40 to 100 years. If we deliver all of that, we will be able to double copper mine production in the next 25 years at prices that are affordable to manufacturers and to consumers.
So, Jon, over to you. What do you think is going to be key to success, and what's the prize if we get this right, especially when it comes to finding and sourcing the copper that we need to meet the growing demand we've been speaking about?
Yeah, so I think, look, copper is so critical to the energy transition, and we need to have this system-wide approach to it. And the engineers that I know on my board and in my business, the senior guys, they all, when you start to talk about, system approaches to solving problems, that's when they get really excited. So that means, all of the participants coming together in partnership, collaborating, bringing all of that diversity of thought and capability to the solution. And if we can do that, I think we can unlock this. But we have to be very thoughtful and mindful about, how we bring everybody together to deliver it. But I think if we do that, we will produce enough copper.
Well, we're going to leave it there. But Menno, Jon, it's been fantastic to have you in to talk with us on Mindshift. And thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Sam.
Thank you, Sam.
Well, that brings us to the end of this episode of Mindshift. A huge thank you to our guests, Jon and Menno, for such thoughtful insights and a really engaging discussion. You've both painted a very clear picture of just how vital copper is to our daily lives and to the energy transition, and why getting this right and sustainably matters so much. Thanks also to all the copper around us in the equipment we're using to record and that you're using to watch and listen, which has, of course, made this podcast possible. And thank you to you, the audience, for joining us. We hope this episode has helped underline the scale of the opportunity and the urgency around copper. Join us again next time when we'll be taking a closer look at how we can build a more sustainable supply of copper to meet this growing demand and create a cleaner energy future. Until then, bye-bye.